So in our last episode, we looked at these binary boxes that we called variables. We use these bad boys so we can store different values and then reference them in other places throughout our spreadsheet or Python program. In this episode of Data Dorks, we're going to look at what computers and applications were really born to do: math. So when we built our gaming computer calculator in the last video, we saw a couple mathematical operators. Specifically, we used both multiplication and addition. So we're going to continue to build on that and along the way touch on some very important concepts in the field of software engineering. First, let's look at the basic arithmetic operators in Excel and what I would say is standard from my TI-83 calculator to a more feature-rich programming language like Python. First, we have our addition and subtraction operators, which are just represented as a plus or minus sign like you would imagine. You can also represent negative numbers using the minus sign. Next is the asterisk, which serves as our multiplication operator if we want to multiply two or more numbers together. Then we have our division operator, which in Excel is represented by the /. And last is our caret operator, which serves as our exponent operator. You are probably noticing the functional section also included in our table. But before we talk about that, let's step back and talk briefly about computer science theory for a minute. So I would say there are four key what us dev dorks called programming paradigms. You can think of a programming paradigm like the base structure or even the highest level thought process of how you go about developing a computer program. These primary programming paradigms are procedural, object-oriented, logical, and functional. We can utilize all of these paradigms in Python. However, Excel is slightly more limiting, so we are largely going to focus on the concept of functional programming, which is fundamental to the way we naturally work with Excel. At the heart of functional programming are these little encapsulated bits of computer code that's sole purpose is to perform some task. We have several upcoming episodes that will make us more comfortable with functions, but for now, we're going to focus on just utilizing these as tools provided to us courtesy of Microsoft and the Python team. Functional programming is just utilizing these functions to perform an operation or evaluate an expression that then the result can be used for something else, whether that is outputting the final result or using another function on that result. Let's take a closer look at the other column in our arithmetic table. So I want to first note that the answers will result in the exact same for both the arithmetic and the functional columns. You're probably thinking, why would they have two ways to do the same thing? But as data dorks, you will see the benefits of thinking and solving problems using functions later on. As it specifically relates to math operators, I don't think these functions are practical, and I would recommend in Python and Excel you use the operators. Now let's look at the functional way to write our arithmetic operators. For addition and subtraction, we can use our sum function, which will add all the numbers we give it together. To use it for subtraction, we would just make the second number we pass negative. Then we have multiplication, which we can use the product function instead if we want to multiply numbers together. Now up to this point, the order we added numbers to our function didn't really matter because we were summing or adding. But what about our quotient function? This is very different from this. If you look at the formula builder on the right, you start to see why functions are very picky about working the way they want to. Our quotient function is expecting our numerator, then the denominator, not the other way around. As we said, but can't say enough, each of these arguments is always separated by a comma. Lastly is the power function, which we can also use to raise a number to a specified power. Let's jump into Python and try to do the same thing we did in our Excel worksheet. Most of the operators are pretty much the same. So if we wanted to add and subtract, we can do it the same way. Same thing with our multiplication and division operators in Python. When we start to see a little difference in the way Python and Excel work with math is in the way Python exponentiation is done, with two asterisks instead of the caret like this. Also, Python has two other operators for division that we don't exactly have in Excel without a special function. The first is floor division, which is 2 slashes instead of 1, and removes the remainder, so if we did something like this, we still get returned 4 even though there is a fraction at the end if we were to regularly divide this. Along with floor division is modulo division, which is practically the opposite, and instead of removing the remainder, it returns the remainder. We use the percent sign to tell Python we want only the remainder after we divide. Assigning numbers to variables, like we covered in our last episode, also still allows you to use each of these operators in the same way on your variables. In this episode, we learned all about math in Excel and Python, and covered the concept of functional programming, so we better understand Excel's approach versus Python's. In our next episode of Data Dorks, we're going to start adding logic to our operators and start working with Boolean expressions.